What table are you sitting at? Who are you talking to? And what are you saying? Understanding who you need to talk to is the first step. Effectively communicating with them is step 2. The CISO role has rapidly developed over the past few years. Still, CISOs function and report differently from org to org. And today we're talking about how CISOs can effectively communicate with the board. So AFTAB, we all know that communicating security risks and strategies to the board can be one of the toughest parts of the job, right? I mean, in your experience, what's the best way to bridge that gap between the technical cybersecurity details and the business priorities that board members really care about?
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's extremely difficult because my experience is that, different boards have different personalities, right? So, so we put that all aside for a moment, but I think there's some core tenets that I fundamentally believe in, right? Number one is be able to make sure you have a really good grasp of the business and make sure that everything that you're articulating to the board is through a business lens, right? Even though it's a security outcome that we're looking to achieve, but the bigger mode of success to get to that outcome is ultimately, can we view this and how do I ensure that the board understands this through the business lens? That's very important. Minimize any technical jargon, right? I think it's very important to not lose your audience, right? Most boards, this is not an area that, any board that I've ever interacted with, they don't understand this space intimately. So avoiding any technical jargon, I recommend it. So make sure that we're aligning with the business objective. The other portion that is important that I think doesn't get highlighted enough also is, don't make the only interaction with the board when you're reporting to them. Have a relationship, so try to build a relationship with the board members throughout the years, throughout the quarters. It's important for you to have that rapport with each individual because, again, understanding the temperament of the board, the personalities is a huge part of it as well. So not only making sure you understand the business very clearly, making sure that you can articulate the security challenges that align with that, making sure you have a really good rapport with the board actually goes a long way as well. And then also, I think it's very important for you to be honest with yourself in terms of the pushback that you're going to, so be prepared for that. Right? Be prepared to understand, what are areas that, if there was a breach recently, or if you had some security challenges for maybe an ISO, a compliance failure, or whatever that may be, make sure that you properly prepare yourself to be able to walk them through that. And then I think the last portion, the last piece that I'll highlight that I think is very important is make sure you tell a very good story, right? So it's easy to approach any conversation with the board as if, hey, this is just information or data transfer, right? I have some information I need to convey to you. I need to transfer that information in a certain way so you can understand it. The part that I would challenge folks with, and I've done that to myself, is, okay, it's not enough for them to understand it, but what are they going to actually remember? Right. So when they leave that meeting or that meeting, or if they're driving home or a week later, are they going to remember? And if you've told a great story, typically that resonates and it lands. And that's a very difficult skill set because most of the time, telling a story requires a different level of thinking. And it does require you to have a good mastery of the business portion of it, the technical portion, and then decide or convey and then find out how to properly convey that to the board. So those would be some of the things that I think that are important. But I say all that to come back to each board that I've dealt with is different. Mm-hmm. And so that also adds a level of complexity. Mm-hmm. But these tenets, I find that, if you stand firm on them, typically yield good results.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I'm glad that you called out that last part. I mean, there's a few things that I definitely want to dive into.
Sure.
But right, the element of all boards are different, right? Yeah. So, if you are your core competency is security and you're a security-based company, your board is very much aligned to, okay, every business has, the top line and bottom line. We all have business objectives, make money, right? Don't lose money. It really is what it comes down to, right?
Sure.
Those are the two knowns that you're always going to work with. You also have boards that are, especially when you're talking about organization size, how involved are they? Banks, sitting down at board meetings is a routine function. Software companies, I can only speak from my experience of 20 plus years working in software companies, is, boards are coming in on a quarterly basis. How involved are they? So I think it does range in that conversation that you're having, if you even have access to them.
Well, that's a good point.
That's the other piece. Right. So going back to some of what we've talked about in episode 1, some of those soft skills, right? When we talk about communication, when we talk about building relationships, getting to that position on, who is talking to the board all the time is the CFO and the CEO, right? Those are very key people to talk to and get some guidance from, understanding when you're even walking into this, because all boards are different. When you go from, your last role to your new role or new opportunity, really understanding what that looks like. Getting that partnership too from things like if a CTO or a CIO has that level of interaction, because that's, very heavy technical, right? Security blends a little bit of both of the technical, but going to one of the things that I really want to dive into is, you talked about it, marrying business objectives with security outcomes. That I find, fortunately and unfortunately, in a lot of varying layers of organizations, to not be known. Doing security for the sake of security because this is what we know, right? This is exactly what we were educated on. This is everything that we've been focused on. This is our day-to-day job to do, but the why. Why are we doing this? We're not just here to click buttons. We're not just here to, solve incidents. It's that too, but it's really to protect the business. It's to protect the bottom line and the top line. It's to make sure that a merger and acquisition goes successfully. It's tied to potentially, some new innovation, new product, new service line. It's something that we're generally tied to that then goes into, like you said, what is the security outcome?
Right. I don't want to convolute the conversation, but I think it's relevant because the reporting structure also matters here, because you said something that I think may have been overlooked, but do you have access even to the board? Like, this conversation is probably not relevant from a certain percentage of CISOs, only because their reporting structure isn't such to where they even have a seat at that table. So being mindful of that is also important, right? When you take on a role, this is a very fair question to ask and push for, is my voice, is the security voice going to be heard at that table? And fighting for that. Because at the end of the day, the resources that you're given and the downstream effect that has is all contingent upon how well that conversation goes. Right. And if you're not even there to share that story or to convey that message, all this is for nothing.
True.
Right.
No, very true.
So that's a point that I would like to highlight as well. And I think it's reasonable and to push for it. Right.
It is.
So
no, I agree. And it's when and it's just a function of, this could likely be in our minds and in a lot of folks, especially those that are new to or on their journey to becoming a CISO, right? In their minds, this could be the most important conversation you have.
Sure.
Maybe not. Let's be frank in the day-to-day operations. The hope is that if you're going to the board for budget, if you're going to the board for key initiatives and strategy, if they're fully engaged, right? To your point, we're having an opportunity to tell a story. This is where we're at as the business. Has the business declared what their risk tolerance or risk appetite is? That I find to be, even if it is happening, maybe it's not being pushed down to the rest of the business, right? And there's so many key aspects of this, but it really does come back to some of the advice that I was given when I had my first interaction with the board. There was a lot of practice.
Yeah,
there was,
right?
Because at the end of the day, when you've only got so many at-bats in this type of exercise, and you are potentially nervous, it's your first time, or you're a seasoned vet, this obviously is something that you're using as a foundation for how you're going to continue down this path.
Yeah.
But the key advice that I was given is right in line, is level of detail, raise it up. You are talking to a set of people that are potentially short with their attention span on your specific topic when they're focused on something else. What's most important? Shareholder value might be one, increasing revenue for the business, looking at different, essentially the financial impact of anything that is being discussed. When you have, maybe it's a breach that we have to talk about, there's nervousness, maybe there's a compliance issue or some new regulatory framework or requirement that we have as a business. But the key on all of this that I was told from an opinion base, or at the very least some guidance, was you have essentially think about everything as green, yellow, red. Green, we're good. Yellow, we've got some decision to make. Red, this is a bad scenario. Okay. But the other piece on it too was be brief, be specific, and also speak with clarity and context. Very important, because you need to get, again, tying it to business objectives. If you're not tied to business objectives, you've lost before you even walked in the room. And the last piece on that, if there is any decision that needs to be made, you may have your desired option one, but you need to go in with, here are the alternatives that we also look at. Because if you go in with a single function or a single idea, I need X number of dollars for this staff, I need X number of dollars for this platform, this is my platform of choice, and you're not giving alternatives, well, you're not giving them the ammunition to have a real productive conversation. And you're also seen as guiding versus requesting some guidance, right? So it's a very different type of interaction that I think most people are really used to.
Yeah, but I want to just dive into one area that you said, and maybe you and I may differ here a little bit, but seat at the board, all that stuff is important, et cetera, et cetera. But what is you said a word, security outcome, and I've used it to some extent, and then we talked about business goal, business objectives. But like, if you would have selfishly, and we were selfishly asked, like, what exactly do we want out of that? And I've had folks give difference of opinion, and maybe you and I may differ a little bit here, but like, what exactly, we're sitting in a room full of folks, what do we want from that? From a security standpoint? Yes, we want to hear a message, and so we have techniques for them to do all that. But at the end of the day, all this does is just to ensure that the security is valued within the company. And I want to highlight that, because that doesn't mean security isn't needed for the company. I think every organization will tell you, maybe it's lip service or not, that yes, security is important. But in that room, at that table, in front of those folks, it's basically a validation that yes, security does matter. And if you walk into that room, regardless of the story, regardless of how well you are able to connect with, build a rapport, at the end of the day, what we want to gain from that or glean from it is security truly valued within the organization? And if it's not to say that it can't be changed, but from a CISO's perspective, you have your work cut out for you. Meaning to say, it needs to be a priority for you to change or inflect that opinion. Not only what your leadership chain, right? If you report directly to the board, maybe the CISOs or whatever, but also how do you convey just how important security is to enabling the business or allowing the business to succeed, and etc. And I think keeping that top of mind is very important. But I don't know, I'd love to hear, or kind of, if you agree with that or not, or if you have maybe a different take of, hey, put all the other stuff aside for a moment. Like, hey, why are we even at this table with this group, and what exactly do I personally, selfishly want out of it?
No, that is the most loaded topic, I think, because it's organization type.
Sure.
Where they are in their security journey. Is it a security is a necessary evil, and we need to do this? I mean, think about the SEC guidelines for those public companies.
Okay.
That they now need to report on their information security program and their strategy and the strength of it, how they're measuring it and monitoring it. This is a requirement now. Where is that definition? Where is that risk appetite? Where is that conversation taking place? Now, is that really happening in the spirit or intention of what it should be? or is it a checkbox approach? Let's not ignore the fact that there is still plenty of checkbox that takes place here. So I think to your point, I mean, in the ideal world, it's important everywhere. It's a core competency. It's a requirement to do business. It's integrated with the business. In the real world, I think it spans. If we talk to 100 different CISOs today, this type of conversation would be a roller coaster.
Yeah.
All over the place. I mean, in my experience, I've had fortunate conversations at the very least that security was important, right? When you get into, we're only built up by the experience that we have, but also talking to a number of CISOs and also security professionals across the board on both sides of the aisle is this is still developing. This is still building. Where is it becoming that core competency? So, it's not a perfect scenario, but I would, this is also something that we could dive into and probably talk for a few hours on.
Correct.
Really, because it does get into this scenario of what is real in most organizations. Right. And for that matter, how even getting to the position of saying, board, you need to take security seriously. That happens. Where does that happen, right? I mean, that happens organically, maybe not. That happens through compliance and regulation, maybe not. That happens through leadership changes. That happens through a CISO like yourself coming in, new to the organization, and having this conversation. Yeah. There's not this silver bullet approach. And I see what that's kind of like what we were talking about before as well, right? This isn't a one-size-fits-all problem. This isn't a fitting in a platform. This isn't a building a soft skill or building a team. This is a organization culture. Yeah.
I wish it was easy because
right.
But just one thing I wanted to just highlight there from one of the subtle things, and you kind of shared it earlier, was the SEC requirements. It's got I was sharing this with my wife, and not to personalize this, but she was sharing like, hey, what are the requirements of a public company, and how does that affect your role and such, and she goes, she was asking me like, is it difficult? Is it not difficult? And I equated to, if like I have 3 daughters, right? And my oldest, we have certain requirements for her. You need to do A, B, and C. And then you have the stuff that she just wants to do on her own. It is a lot easier for us to get her to do that stuff that she wants to do on her own, more so than you have to do A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. And I use that same analogy to say like, hey, if you get to a board meeting or if you're with leadership and it's, hey, we have to do security because of some compliance, not to say that's a bad thing, but it definitely does share a lot for you in terms of what is needed from you to change that, to inflect that, right? Mm-hmm. And similarly to the board, or similar to, is like if you're in those meetings and that sentiment is from that angle, right? It's going to require probably a lot more diligence, a lot more focus for you to try to change that, make sure they understand the implications of it, et cetera, et cetera. More so than you join an organization and, agenda, security is on there without you even mentioning it. And it's, hey, Scott, there's a board meeting, be prepared for it. More so than, hey, when's the next board meeting, et cetera, right? Very different culture, but more specifically, maybe very different ask. Because in an organization that has it already, I'm going to say it's easier, but the work is not as, I think, up a hill climb as it would be on the other side, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. I mean, and that's, would you be driven in any different direction if you walked in or as part of your interview process to become a CISO and security is not a board agenda item?
I like challenges. When I met my wife, she didn't really like me at first. So I like challenges, but it does, you go with eyes wide open, I think is a bigger one. And for me, I prefer that. Look, at the end of the day, everyone has their own kind of way they do want to run their organization. For me, it's better for me to know, okay, what I'm walking into, what I'm potentially going to have to deal with. But more importantly, how do I strategize around it? Because, navigating personality stuff, I don't think it's, at least in my opinion, it's relatively easy, but what strategy do I need to bring to the table? Mm-hmm. Like you said, I think in our last episode, 60, 90, 100, like that has to be part of your strategy and what that looks like. How do you think about it? How do you build your cases for it? How do you align with the business? And all of that stuff is in some way, shape, or form being the thrust of it is, okay, I know that, I have this type of board or this type of sentiment at the way top, and it's going to take a lot more, or it's going to take this to, get the outcome that we ultimately need.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing that's for certain is that as we continue to move down the continuum of information security in organizations, where CISOs are seen as business leaders
yes.
versus technologists, right? This is a transformation. The CIOs went through transformations like this not that long ago, right? This is still new, but the plan for this is in any of these interactions, even if it's the board, whether it's committees made of your C-suite, right? These are key opportunities to make sure that we are having good conversation, productive conversation, tied to business objectives, not just security in a vacuum. Really giving some alternatives on this is the risk that we have to mitigate or control or transfer, whatever the capacity is there, but being able to have that conversation. So it's good to practice and be prepared for when that day comes, because for certain, if a breach does occur, very likely you're having this conversation.
Yeah, you'll be on the hot seat. That'll be fine.
Loving this show? Then you should definitely check out the team behind it. Sweetfish is a video podcast agency that partners with B2B brands to create amazing shows like this one. Want to co-host the next season of this show? Or maybe your marketing team is looking to develop a show of your own. Head over to sweetfishmedia.com and book a call with their team. It's time for our next segment, Research Roundup, where we dive into some data that the Sweetfish team has found for us. Today's stat is a sobering one. According to recent data, companies take an average of 277 days to identify and respond to a cyber attack. That's more than 3/4 of a year before action is taken. Why do you think it takes so long for organizations to detect and react to these attacks, and what can really be done to shorten that time frame?
Wow. So you can take it in two ways. I think, number one is you can start questioning the security team in general, But I think the reality of it is too. I think a couple of points that I'll highlight. Number one is it speaks to the complexity of security, right? I saw a mind map recently about all the things that the CISO is responsible for, and it was like 1,000 things on there. It's insane. How does any one organization, any one leader can possibly be accountable for all of these different variants and corner cases? It's just impossible. So I think number one, that number highlights just the complexity of the role, right? Because it's, if you're, for example, I've been at a handful of SaaS companies. You have your SaaS product, and then all the nuances that goes with building the development, the compliance piece of it. If it's infrastructure, if you're hosted in the cloud, like all of the third party stuff. Oh, not to mention all the traditional enterprise security items. And then, by the way, do you have all the HR controls in place? Oh, by the way, the legal aspect of it. So the physical security. So when you start going line by line by line, you start realizing that everything gets bundled into this security moniker, but yet there's so many undertone pieces to it that is super difficult. So complexity is one. Detection is another, right? You can't protect what you can't see. This is extremely difficult because it's expensive too, right? I've used one of the larger SIM products on the market, and I'd love to shove all of my telemetry into that thing, but the bill will be astronomical. So then you make trade-offs, right? What are those trade-offs? You have a risk tolerance, okay, but even then, what if you're wrong? And your risk tolerance identifies an area that actually where the breach occurred, but yet it wasn't part of your detection. So that plays a huge role into it as well. And then I think just the maturity, also it speaks to organizations, particularly I think security. The organization that I've been part of, security it was somewhat of an afterthought at first, and then obviously when they get to a certain level of maturity, they play. So that also comes into play to highlight this figure that, once you get to a certain level, and I'd be interested to kind of dive into those days. Like, does it break out to the size of the company or how long they've been in business? Because I would imagine that would have some effects on it as well.
Yeah, of course.
So those are the ones that really stand out to me. But it is unfortunate, as someone who's passionate about the space, I'd love to see that number go down.
Right.
It's I know a lot of folks who unfortunately, myself included, but who have been part of really publicly facing breaches, and like it's easy to read something in the paper and say, oh, company X, their security team must quote unquote suck. People are doing a lot of good work, great work, working their tails off. It's just very, very difficult and complex. And I don't think, because this is a newer area and because security is starting to get, I think, more and more visibility within the organization, with that will come the acknowledgement of how complex it is as well. Right? It's not just as simple. You do security, okay, make sure you change your password, right? So people understand the nuances of all of that stuff as well.
Yeah, right.
So that I think also, but I think complexity is a big one. 100%. I think the detection, obviously, you have make some trade-offs there, but to me, and then the maturity of the organization, what journey they're on. But it's not. I mean, I'm not surprised by it. It is a little disheartening.
But that's just it, right? It's when it really comes down to it. It's what is the tech stack? So there's two pieces.
Okay.
The tech stack.
Okay.
What is going to minimize that time from detection and response? Right.
So when you say tech stack, you're talking about the detection tech stack?
Yeah, detection, and even some of the services that you could even get into, but then staff and their understanding and being able to identify it. Right. There's not everything operates like the most talked about, advertised exploits of the world. Right? The ransomware. Every ransomware becomes a household terminology just based on the fact that there is some distinct impact to it. It's talked about in the news. You see it now on modern television shows in prime time. This is ransomware has been around for a very, very long time. But now within the last couple of years, I believe it was on the morning show, right, which is an Apple TV show. It's one of these things that high actors and high paid actors and actresses are on, what have you, well-known household names. But now all of a sudden we've got this breach that's taking place that's now happening in living rooms. But when you think about some of the exploits that occur, the whole kill chain of an attack that happens, right? From the general inception to the reconnaissance to enumeration and all the way through, this entire function is if you people looking at logs raw are not going to identify this. Let's be realistic.
It's impossible.
And like you said, SIM has got some level of expense to it that we'd love to have all the telemetry in there, and you can't see what you can't manage essentially what you can't see.
Correct.
Right? So this becomes a position on visibility. And what I also really focus on, and in my world, and always has been, is focused entirely on data. Understanding what are we even trying to protect. And a lot of times that when it gets it down to the business objectives as well as, if we look at our entire network end to end or our entire infrastructure that we're trying to support, and you brought up third parties and there's a shared security model and everything else, that becomes just enormous expense to put the same control on every single endpoint, on every single network device, and every single network segment, on every single application. So there's got to be some risk-based approach because organizations have to accept this risk. But when I think about the 277 days, and you bring up a valid point, very likely tied to team size, maturity, budget for security, potential just organization itself, that has a big role. It's just, to me, the place that technology fits into this environment and people that are able to use it in the right way and architect it and design it the right way and operate it the right way is truly the only chance that you have to really break this down. And taking the risk-based approach on making sure it's in the right spots, because if it's not, and you're not looking in where your most critical data exists, your most critical business infrastructure and applications and what's driving your business, then 277 days is it almost becomes acceptable even by default.
It's like, what is that statement? It's not if you get breached, it's when. But
right.
But Scott, I have to believe, and I want to believe, and I truly believe, well, maybe it can be better. Meaning to say, we can't get better, but the complexity piece of it, like how can we make that go. I would say not go away, but like, how could we solve that to some extent? Because that's what I find to be probably the most telling about this.
Yeah, right.
Is that anything that's somewhat related to security ends up falling in the responsibility of the security teams, and it's just impossible for you to put a number. Like, for example, early in my career, what really sparked my security kind of journey was a really large retailer was hacked, and then I was working at a retailer at the time, and it opened our eyes up.
Sure.
And so you read that report. We read the report, and then come to find out they had all of the technical stack that they needed. They even had the alerts that highlighted, but they had their detection or their response mechanism was so complex. It was virtually impossible for the staff level that they were at for them to ever be able to triage or even look into that. So I think the complexity portion of it, this to me translates to complexity more so than anything. And then the next, I think the logical thing to ask yourself is, how do we trim down that complexity?
Right.
And then, is there a mechanism or a line that we can draw between less complex, quicker time to identify? My hypothesis was maybe yes, and I think that's probably a bigger portion of it, more so than anything else. But it is sad to see that number. To be honest with you, I hope that one day that maybe AI solved it. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully, right? You got to use it to fight it. I mean, at the end of the day, it is very complex, but it's something that at the very least, people in the information security space are focused on. The alerts that you don't see or don't respond to in time are meaningless. Yeah, they're completely meaningless.
Yeah. And this also could set the tone for they always talk about, like, what's your baseline? Like, hey, this conversation is really about how to speak with the board. I wouldn't necessarily walk into a board meeting saying 270 days is a is the standard. Therefore, that's what we're going to hold our to. But I think it does help contextualize, the uphill climb that security organizations do have, and again, should help a CISO articulate the value prop and obviously all the stuff that to the board a lot better. Because if this is the reality and the norm for the industry, a year later, I mean, that's a pretty high number.
It is, right? But it's also baseline. I would really like to highlight and kind of almost going back into what are some of the core tenets: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This has been unfortunately too embedded in the security culture for too long. It doesn't work. Look at the breach reports. Look at the number of incidents. Look at the things that are taking place in our environment that are consistent threats that are, we got 0 days and APTs. We got to fight we got to fight the insider threat too, which is very, very hard to identify if we're not looking at the right stuff. Wow. But at the core in these conversations, even this statistic itself highlights, okay, we have 277 days that we could be under breach and not know it. But this is just more fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Correct.
So, maybe that is, it's limit the complexity, focus on the right areas, make sure that this is a end-to-end view, and putting the right tools and the right focus in the right areas, will help this out altogether.
Even though you do all that, you're still, I mean,
this is a consistent fight.
Correct.
That's what I think a lot of people think about, and maybe I'm incorrect here, but it's always the hacker is this individual that's sitting with the hood up and glasses on and the mask or whatever. Right now, there are full scale organizations that are pushing out product and services that are doing the exact same thing, and are nation state actors. Right? I mean, and that's key to understand, is that the battle is a very real war than it is one-off incidents.
Yeah, no. Someone used the term one time. This is the new modern day battlefield.
It is,
and now, granted, I think the stakes could be different for different organizations, but that is the reality, and that's the way you can look at it. But it is unfortunate, and I think hopefully with time that we can trim this number down maybe next year.
That's right.
The numbers, but that is pretty astonishing to see.
It is. Want more CISO goodness between episodes? Follow CISO Circle on LinkedIn. We're posting all the time, whether it's clips from these episodes, show updates, or behind-the-scenes content. We're a fun follow, I promise. All right, so for our last segment, it's going to be a little game that we like to call Malware or Myth. So here's how it works. I'll name something, and AFTAB has to tell me whether it's a real piece of malware or something that I just made up. And then we're going to switch roles. We're going to go back and forth here a little bit. So,
I'm sure it's all made up. I'm sure it's all... Go for it.
All right. So first up, flame worm.
Flame worm.
Is it real?
I think it's a real...
It is a real sophisticated malware that was discovered in 2012, and that I'll tell you, it's some of these names. I'll just as a little side here. Could you imagine there must be someone that's sitting together in a room of people that come up with these types of names, right? It's kind of like the actors' names they come up with themselves. We're Crazy Sprite or whatever the case may be. You look at at some of the reports that are out there that are naming the bad actors, but what an amazing world the cartoons that we live in here. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like in my current role, every initiative that we take on, we give it a project name.
Yeah, right.
And so like the thing that teams are most excited about is finding their name. Like it's like, okay, why is this so? But it's just ironic that
at least we have some excitement. In our world,
Project Project Nebula was one of them we named, or one guy named was Project Shoemaker. So
there you go.
Okay.
All right, hit me.
Cool. The next one, Dragonfly Trojan.
It sounds real, so I'm gonna go with real malware.
Are you sure?
Oh well, now you got me second guessing here. Dragonfly sounds familiar. I just don't. Is it a Trojan? Hit me. Let me know. Am I right? Am I wrong?
So partially correct.
Okay.
Dragonfly refers to a cyber group, but there's no specific Dragonfly Trojan.
Got it.
So it's kind of a myth term, being in terms of being specific to a malware.
This is the problem of what we just talked about, right? This is the world we live in. Dragonfly, sure, I heard of it without question. It's something, if it's tied to an insect, it's very likely real. But when you throw things like Trojan on there, it's like it's some specificity. All right, so last one we got here. You ready?
All right.
All right, deep breaths.
All right.
Butterfly botnet.
Okay. And this is malware, right?
This is a malware or is it a myth? It's got an insect name in it. What do you think?
All right, it's a myth.
Hey, there you go. All right. So you are correct on that one. It is most certainly a myth. Butterfly, it is an insect, so it does follow. Botnet, we're trying to throw some curveballs at you.
All
right. So you had your last one. It looks like, or do we have a few more? We may.
I have one for you.
All right.
Let's see. Black energy malware.
Black energy malware. Is that kind of reminds me, is that like one of the power grid attacks that took place?
I can't tip my hat.
I want to say it's a real malware.
That's correct. It is.
Was it tied to the power grids?
It is. Ukraine.
That was okay.
Ukrainian
All right.
power grids, yes.
So I'm not too far off.
Yeah,
not too far off. All right. Let's say, as long as we're having such a good time.
All right.
Tab, let's continue down this path. All right. So let's do two more. Mm-hmm. One for you, one for me.
Okay.
And then we'll close this out. So we've got Silverfish ransomware. Is it malware or it is a myth?
So Silverfish, I'm gonna guess it's a myth.
You're correct, man.
Luck.
Way to go.
I got lucky.
I don't. We're really striking a charm here between some of this reality and myth buster. But you are, sir, a myth buster. All right. What do you got for me? Last one.
So Dark Comet Rat. How about that?
So remote access Trojan, Dark Comet. It's not hitting that insect, but that sounds familiar. I don't know if it's just from some of the love that I've got for astrology or if it's real. I'm gonna say and go out on a limb here. It's real malware, remote access Trojan.
It's better be lucky than good, man.
Okay, that's
good. You got it.
I wasn't sure, but that's good. All right, very good. Well,
that was fun. That was fun.
Good conversation.
Yeah, it's always fun. Yeah.
All right, so before we close it out today, I want to give you a little preview of what's coming up next. In our next episode, we're going to talk about something every organization should be focusing on: building a culture of security awareness. Threats are constantly evolving, and technology alone won't protect us. It's about getting every employee on board with security from the top down. We'll be diving into how to foster that culture, train your teams effectively, and make security a core part of the business mindset. You won't want to miss it. Remember, security fuels innovation, complexity is the enemy, and collaboration is the way. Until next time.